All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General of the United Nations is in Beijing today, where he spoke earlier at the opening ceremony of the Second Belt and Road Forum on International Cooperation. In his remarks, he said that this is a time of uncertainty and unease, but that the choices we make now are essential to put us on a low-carbon growth path that is sustainable and inclusive and will build resilience. The Secretary General said that the world will benefit from a Belt and Road Initiative that accelerates efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and stressed the world needs to take profit of the initiative to help close the significant financing gap for achieving the SDGs. He said that United Nations country teams will work to support the member states in capacity and governments building and in achieving harmonious and sustainable integration of Belt and Road projects in their own economies and societies, in accordance with national development plans anchored in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. He said that he also sees the initiative as an important space where green principles can be reflected in green action, adding that fully expanding our policy of options for green and sustainable development and backed by green financing instruments must become the new norm. In the Chinese capital, the Secretary General also met with President Xi Jinping. He expressed his appreciation for China's support for the UN's work, including through its contributions to peacekeeping, South-South cooperation, UN reform, and leadership on climate change. He also congratulated President Xi on the upcoming 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China this year, noting that 2019 marks 40 years of the UN presence in the country. The Secretary General and the President also discussed the Belt and Road Initiative's potential to bolster development and reduce poverty in line with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Tomorrow, he will participate in the Leaders' Roundtable sessions and will deliver the keynote speech at a session on the topic of promoting green and sustainable development to implement the 2030 Agenda. And also on the sidelines of the summit of the conference, the Secretary General met with President Nyusi of Mozambique. The Secretary General expressed his solidarity with the people and government in wake of the Cyclone Idai and the more recent Cyclone Kenneth. The Secretary General pledged the United Nations support for relief efforts. And on that note, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mark Lowcock, said in a statement today that he is deeply saddened by the loss of life and destruction caused by Cyclone Kenneth, which first hit Comoros 2 days ago and is made landfall last night in northern Mozambique. The disaster comes 6 weeks after Cyclone Idai devastated central Mozambique, killing more than 600 people and causing widespread devastation. As we said, Cyclone Kenneth marks the first time two cyclones have made landfall in Mozambique during the same season. Malawi and Zimbabwe are also expected to experience heavy rains and flooding caused by the weather system. OCHA is helping to coordinate the government-led response and manage information, while the Joint World Food Programme and International Organization for Migration teams are pre-positioned to support the response. Emergency stocks have also been positioned in the Comoros. The UN is supporting government-led assessment. And our humanitarian colleagues plan to have a guest at the briefing on Monday from Mozambique, who will give you an update on the response to the cyclone. Turning to Libya, the UN is gravely concerned about the continued reports of indiscriminate shelling of civilian areas in Tripoli. The United Nations reminds the parties of the need to protect civilians and to grant immediate and unconditional access for our humanitarian partners. Our colleagues said that the humanitarian situation in Tripoli continues to deteriorate, with heavy fighting ongoing, including in populated areas. Last night, rockets and mortar shells were reportedly fired on residential neighborhoods in the city. Nearly 39,000 people have now been displaced. That's according to the UN Migration Agency, and verification of civilian casualties is ongoing. Civilians in conflict-affected areas are experiencing electricity cuts and water shortages as a result of damaged infrastructure, while access to essential items such as food, medicine, and fuel is being severely hampered. Humanitarian partners evacuated 655 refugees and migrants from the Qasr bin al-Qasir detention center, where violence injured a dozen people on Tuesday. More than 3,000 refugees and migrants remain trapped in 7 facilities around Tripoli. And on the Syrian political front, the special envoy Geir Peterson was in Astana today and yesterday for the meeting organized by Iran, Russia, and Turkey, and hosted by Kazakhstan in an effort to support progress that could contribute to the political process in Geneva, as per Security Council Resolution 2254. Mr. Peterson was accompanied by a technical delegation from the UN, and next Tuesday, Mr. Peterson will be here to brief the Security Council in person. And we've also asked him to brief you in person before you ask. Thank me when he says yes. Turning to Bangladesh, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock, the Director General of the International Organization for Migration, Antonio Vittorino, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, today highlighted the urgent need to sustain the support for Rohingya refugees. In the end of their visit to Bangladesh, the three officials called on the international community to continue supporting the critical needs of 1.2 million people, mostly Rohingya refugees, but also generous host communities in the southeastern part of Bangladesh. During their visit, they went to see the refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, met with various refugee groups. They also stressed the importance of expanding opportunities for these refugees to learn and get skills training, as most refugees have access to limited schooling or are missing out on education altogether. More information is online. Also on the subject of refugees, UNHCR today says it's deeply concerned about the fate of at least 21 Venezuelans missing after their boat sank yesterday on their way to Trinidad and Tobago. The boat was carrying at least 25 people. The Trinidad and Tobago authorities said 4 people have been rescued in a joint effort with their Venezuelan counterparts. At least 21 people, among them women and children, are still unaccounted for while the rescue efforts are continuing. More than 3 million Venezuelans have left their country since 2015, mostly in neighboring countries, including the islands in the southern part of the Caribbean. And our colleagues at the UN Migration Agency report that authorities in Aden and in Yemen have since Sunday rounded up and arbitrarily detained more than 2,000 irregular migrants, predominantly Ethiopian nationals. IOM says it's deeply concerned about the conditions in which these migrants, including at least 400 children, are being held. The organization is engaging with the authorities to ensure access to them and is coordinating the humanitarian community's response, focusing on critical needs such as basic health care, food, water, and sanitation. We are urging local authorities to work with the humanitarian community to find safer alternatives to detention and to ensure a full spectrum of protection services are available to those detained. And just flagging from Mali, UNICEF is warning that a deterioration of the humanitarian situation in the region of Mopti, which has seen so much recent violence, is increasingly impacting the most vulnerable children. UNICEF is particularly concerned about the increase in school closures. Nearly 1/3 of all schools in the Mopti region are now closed due to insecurity, compromising the right of education to over 157,000 children. UNICEF has also been working with the government of Mali and other humanitarian actors to support children, including advocating for school reopening wherever conditions allow, which has led to the recent reopening of 150 schools in other parts of the country. And just to flag that, as you will see, yesterday afternoon, the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, and the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Ursula Mueller, briefed the Security Council on the latest developments in Ukraine. Ms. DiCarlo commended the Ukrainian people on their peaceful conduct of the recent elections, adding the UN is committed to continuing to work with Ukraine and the people of Ukraine to support the provision of humanitarian assistance, promotion and safeguarding of human rights, and the country's reform process. Ms. Ursula Mueller also noted that 3.5 million people are still in need of humanitarian assistance and protection, and she stressed the importance of redoubling efforts to provide them with all the necessary support. And I have been asked a number of times about an update on our humanitarian operations in Venezuela. And I can tell you that from January to April, UNICEF distributed over 2 million kits for child and maternal health to 9 health centers and hospitals. Over 7,400 children have received nutritional support in 8 states. 25 communities and 10 schools are now being supported by critical WASH activities, which has to do with water and sanitation. 84 safe birth kits have been distributed to health centers and hospitals, and over 12,000 people with HIV have received treatment. 46,000 meal rations have been distributed for people in transit, and more than 1,500 family kits have been distributed for people in transit. Mr. Bays.
Following up on my question yesterday about the Uyghurs and their situation and the human rights abuses against them, the Secretary-General has been in Beijing. What has he been saying in public and private about this issue? And what does he make of the very strong criticism of Human Rights Watch that he's not addressing this issue in public and, in fact, many other human rights situations in public? The Executive Director of Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth, says his excessively quiet diplomacy is selling short his position and the promise of the United Nations. Your reaction?
Where should we start? Let's start with China. As I mentioned, Secretary General is discussing all relevant issues with the Chinese leadership. The visit is ongoing and discussions are ongoing. I should have a bit more for you on Monday. I think this Secretary General has been anything but quiet on his defense of human rights globally. I would refer you to a number of speeches he's delivered at the Human Rights Council, in the way also that he has really mainstreamed the role of human rights in all of the UN's work, from explicitly telling all the resident coordinators of the UN that represent the UN in every country that they do have a human rights mandate. The Human Rights High Commissioner participates and is an active voice in the senior-most leadership, the Executive Committee, that meets every week to ensure that human rights is is taken into account in every discussion. The Secretary General, I think, has been extremely vocal on a number of human rights issues, which Mr. Roth even acknowledges, whether it's on Guatemala, on the defense of journalists, on the Rohingyas, on the issue of children in armed conflict, on the issue of gender and gender parity, and the protection of speaking out against violence against women, which is a fundamental human rights. I think his words of against hate speech, one of the few leaders that actually, I think, verbalized the great risk of the rise of Nazi ideology. I think he has been outspoken across the spectrum. Now, obviously, I think everyone in the human rights community, and that includes the Secretary General, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN's human rights system, all the mechanism as a whole, the NGO community, everyone has a role to play. People have different roles. The Secretary General will raise issues in private and will raise issues in public. But frankly, what he says privately, I think, matches very much what he says publicly.
Very quick follow-up. When then did he last speak out about the situation regarding the Uyghurs publicly, and does he make a different calculation on speaking out on human rights issues that involve human rights abuses by permanent members?
No, I don't think there is that calculation. His goal is to promote human rights. He will do it differently at different times, but the goal and the way he achieves that goal will remain the same. Edie.
As a follow-up to James, before I ask my question, can we find out whether the Secretary General did raise the Uyghur issue
Sure. I mean,
with the secretary, the president of China?
We'll get a bit more on Monday. I've been in touch with the Secretary General, but we'll have a bit more once the visit is finished.
I was just going to ask on Libya, whether Mr. Salameh is having any success in his international talks with trying to get supporters of both sides to put pressure on them for a ceasefire.
Well, Mr. Salameh is continuing his talks. He was, as we said, he's in Rome. He's currently in Paris, where he met with French officials. He's continuing his international consultations on the ground. UNSMIL remains in touch with all the parties to try to reach a cessation of hostilities, or at least a humanitarian pause. Unfortunately, we know we've been very transparent about reporting what's going on the ground. I mean, there was overnight shelling of residential areas overnight, which is completely unacceptable by any measure. Mr. Salameh and his staff will continue in their work in contact with the parties themselves, and as you rightly said, with those who have an influence over the parties themselves. Carol, then Masoud.
In Rome, Qassem Salameh said that he was working to get a ceasefire before the start of Ramadan. Is that still the objective, and is he closer to that?
That's what he's.
Is he getting closer?
We haven't seen as far as no, we haven't. Ramadan has not yet started. Thank you, Yassine. We still have 1 week apparently. He said what he said. We're working towards a cessation of hostilities. Masoud.
Thank you, Stéphane. Stéphane, one glaring example of Secretary General's silence on human rights abuses has been consistently Kashmir, what is happening in Kashmir, and Indian-occupied Kashmir. And why is it that all said and done, Secretary General may have somehow broached this subject, when it comes to Kashmir, he's absolutely quiet. Is it the pressure?
I would refer you to what the Secretary General said on the issue when the High Commissioner's report came out.
When Mr. Zaid Sultan gave a statement and wanted access to Indian-occupied, and he was denied that access. At that point in time...
I would refer you to what the Secretary General said at the time.
Did the Secretary General raise the issue of OHCHR sending inspectors to Xinjiang in any of his meetings with Chinese officials? And as the spokesman for the Secretary General, do you agree with Kenneth Ross' assertion that he has not said a word about Xinjiang in public?
The Secretary General, I think, answered a question on Xinjiang in this very room during a press conference. And as I just said, we will have more on the Secretary General's discussions as the meetings are still going on. He still has a full day in China. Mr. Bays.
President Trump is reportedly likely to pull out of the arms trade treaty. I know you will not comment on things that haven't happened yet, but perhaps you could give us the Secretary General's view on the arms trade treaty and its importance.
I think the Secretary General is as strong a believer as anyone in the need for continued and sustained action on disarmament. He has launched a number of initiatives, and he has spoken out very clearly in favor of the various UN's arms control and treaties, and treaties having to do with nuclear non-proliferation. Why not?
I just want to clarify whether or not you've received any indication from the U.S. administration.
I'm not aware. I've just all I've seen is what's in the press, and I believe the President of the United States is speaking as we speak. Thank you. Okay, Linda, and then Monica will allow a question from Linda. Please.
Thank you. Anyway, Steph, I have a question, a passport issue. I know there's been concern.
I have a French one.
Can I apply for one?
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off.
In any case, we know there's been concern about the passport issue in terms of Russia saying it would expedite some passports for
Oh,
people
in
in
Ukraine.
Eastern Europe. Yes, I'm
Okay, sorry. No,
Ukraine.
You buried the lead there. Yeah.
So my question is, do you know if the SG has ever made a statement, another statement, about a country's policy regarding issuing passports?
I'm not aware, and I would refer you. I think I made some comments yesterday, and then Ms. DiCarlo, I think, mentioned in her statement yesterday. Monica, all yours.